A cocky young fighter mocks a 72-year-old Vietnam veteran during sparring, deliberately targeting the old soldier's war wounds while cameras roll for social media content. The punk laughs as he lands cheap shots on the veteran's shrapnel scars, then makes sick jokes about his dead son who died in Afghanistan. But the quiet old man watching from the corner isn't just another gym member. This is Mike Tyson himself, training in disguise. The bully has no idea he just humiliated a decorated veteran in front of a man who spent decades destroying opponents with lightning-fast combinations. While the young fighter poses for his Instagram followers, the legendary heavyweight steps into the ring with that unmistakable menace in his eyes. The veteran recognizes his savior and steps back, knowing swift justice is about to be delivered. The punk's crew keeps filming, thinking they're capturing another viral moment, but they're actually recording their boy's brutal education and respect. What happens when you disrespect a war hero in front of Iron Mike? Can anyone survive 3 decades of knockout power unleashed in righteous fury? What happened next would terrorize the bully for the rest of his pathetic existence. Before we jump back and tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra. Special for you, the weathered brass key turned in the lock at exactly 6 o'clock, same as it had every morning for the past 8 years. Frank Kowalski pushed open the heavy door of Murphy's boxing gym, breathing in the familiar scent of leather, sweat, and decades of determination that had soaked into the worn wooden floors. At 72, his movements carried the quiet precision of a man accustomed to discipline. Military bearings softened by age, but never broken. The gym held shadows and silence, broken only by the distant hum of Brooklyn traffic filtering through. Windows that had watched champions rise and fall since 1975. Frank flipped the main switch, and harsh fluorescent lights flickered to life, revealing faded photographs of forgotten warriors who'd learned their craft within these walls. Golden Gloves winners from the 80s smiled down from frames that had yellowed with time, their youth preserved in black and white, while their bodies had long since surrendered to Father Time. But Frank wasn't alone. In the far corner, near the heavy bags that hung like sleeping giants, a figure moved with surprising grace for such an early hour. The man wore a faded gray hoodie pulled low over a baseball cap, his face obscured as he methodically cleaned gloves and checked the bag chains with hands that seemed too gentle for his broad frame. Frank had noticed him around for months now, always early, always quiet, always helping without being asked. "Morning, Mickey," Frank called softly, using the only name the stranger had ever offered. The grunt of acknowledgement came from beneath the cap, followed by the continued rhythm of maintenance work that kept the old gym functioning despite its age. Frank began his own routine, checking the ring ropes and sweeping the canvas that had absorbed the dreams and blood of countless fighters. His left side protested with each movement, the old shrapnel wound from Vietnam sending familiar reminders up his ribs. Some mornings were worse than others, but he'd learned to work through pain decades ago. The first students arrived at 6:30, 3 kids whose parents trusted Frank enough to drop them off in the dark. 12-year-old Bobby Kowalski led the group, his sandy hair still messy from sleep, but his blue eyes bright with anticipation. The other two, Marcus Williams and little Tony DeLuca, followed Bobby like soldiers following their sergeant. "Hands up, feet moving," Frank instructed as the boys took their positions at the light bags. His voice carried the patient authority of a teacher who'd repeated these fundamentals thousands of times, each repetition an act of faith that someday they'd matter. Mickey emerged from the equipment room, carrying a perfectly wrapped set of hand wraps. He approached Frank with the quiet steps of a man who understood the sacred nature of morning training. When young minds absorbed lessons that would shape their character for life, Frank noticed the stranger's hands again, massive, with knuckles that told stories of their own. But when Mickey handed over the wraps, his touch was surprisingly gentle, almost reverent. "Thank you," Frank said, accepting the gift with genuine gratitude. Mickey nodded once and disappeared back into the shadows, but Frank caught something in those dark eyes. Recognition, maybe, or respect. The kind of look one fighter gives another when words aren't necessary. As the morning session ended and the boys gathered their gear, Frank found himself wondering about the mysterious helper who asked for nothing but gave freely of his time and skill. the gym door exploded inward with a crash that shattered the morning's peaceful rhythm. Dante the Destroyer, Williams strode through the entrance like a conquering general, his gold chains catching the overhead lights as his entourage followed in formation. At 24, he moved with the arrogant swagger of someone who'd never learned the difference between confidence and cockiness. This is it. Dante's voice echoed off the walls as he surveyed the gym with obvious disdain. This is the legendary Murphy's boxing gym. Behind him, three people scrambled to keep up. Rico Martinez, his manager, clutched a phone and notepad while scanning for photo opportunities. Ashley Chan, his social media director, immediately began setting up camera equipment with the practiced efficiency of someone who turned every moment into content. Tom Bradley, the videographer, shouldered a professional camera and started filming before anyone could object. Frank continued working with elderly Mrs. Patterson, helping the 75-year-old woman practice basic self-defense moves that her physical therapist had recommended after her hip replacement. She moved slowly but determinedly, following Frank's gentle guidance with the focus of someone who refused to let age make her a victim. "Yo, check this out," Dante laughed, pointing at the old woman throwing careful punches at a low, heavy bag. "Grandma's trying to box. This is content gold." Ashley's live stream immediately lit up with comments as viewers tuned in to watch Dante's gym tour. The numbers climbed rapidly: 500, 1,000, 1,500 people watching in real time as he mocked everything from the cracked mirrors to the duct-taped speed bags. From the equipment corner, Mickey watched silently, his hands stilling as he observed the disruption. His body language shifted almost imperceptibly, shoulders squaring as he positioned himself with a clear view of the unfolding situation. Eddie Murphy emerged from his small office, alerted by the commotion. At 68, the gym owner moved, with the careful steps of a man whose joints had absorbed decades of hard work, but his voice carried firm authority when he spoke. "Gentlemen, we have rules about filming in here. You need permission before rules?" Dante interrupted, pulling a thick wad of cash from his pocket and fanning it like a peacock displaying his feathers. "These are the only rules I follow. Pops, I'm here to drag this place into the 21st century." Ashley encouraged him with nods and gestures, knowing that conflict always boosted engagement. The comment section exploded with reactions as viewers picked sides, some supporting Dante's brash confidence, while others sensed something disturbing about his attitude. "This gym has been serving this community for 35 years, Eddie said quietly. "We ask for respect. Respect." Dante's laugh was sharp and cruel. "For what? Ancient equipment and has-beens teaching outdated techniques? Look around you, old man. This place is a museum." Mrs. Patterson stopped her careful practice, intimidated by the loud stranger who seemed to find her efforts amusing. Frank gently guided her away from the cameras, his protective instincts engaged as he recognized the predatory nature of the intrusion. Mickey continued his silent observation, pretending to organize towels while his dark eyes tracked every movement, every gesture of disrespect. His hands, moments ago gentle as he maintained equipment, now gripped the fabric with barely controlled tension. Eddie retreated to his office to make phone calls, overwhelmed by the sudden invasion of his peaceful domain. The old gym had weathered many storms, but this felt different, more calculated, more dangerous than simple youthful arrogance that A.S. Dante's crew continued setting up equipment, transforming the sacred space into a film set. The morning's tranquility evaporated like steam. Frank finished helping Mrs. Patterson gather her things, his jaw tight with controlled anger at seeing an elderly woman made uncomfortable in what should have been a safe space. Dante launched into an impromptu tour for his growing audience, his phone showing hundreds of comments flowing like digital applause for his performance. He moved through the gym like a critic at a failing restaurant, pointing out every flaw with theatrical disgust. "Look at this pathetic speed bag," he announced to his camera, giving the worn leather a dismissive tap. "This thing probably trained Rocky Marciano. And these heavy bags? I've seen more padding on a park bench." His livestream numbers climbed past 2,000 viewers as he crafted content from cruelty, each mocking comment designed to generate reactions and shares. The algorithm rewarded engagement, and nothing engaged audiences like watching someone tear down what others held sacred. Frank attempted to maintain normalcy, working with two teenage amateur boxers on fundamental combinations. 17-year-old Kevin Torres and 16-year-old Marcus Williams watched their instructor demonstrate proper form on the mitts, the sharp crack of leather on leather providing a steady rhythm that had echoed through the gym for decades. "Keep your guard up," Frank instructed quietly, his patient voice carrying the authority of experience. "Power comes from your legs, not your arms." Dante's head snapped toward the sound, sensing an opportunity for content. He strutted over with his phone extended, broadcasting the interaction to his growing audience. Hold up," Dante interrupted, his voice cutting through the lesson like a knife. "You're teaching these kids wrong, old man. That technique is outdated garbage that'll get them hurt in a real fight." Kevin and Marcus exchanged uncertain glances, caught between their trusted instructor and the loud stranger who seemed so confident in his criticism. Frank maintained his composure, but Mickey's presence seemed to shift in the background, his attention focused laser-sharp on the developing confrontation. "Watch and learn," Dante announced, shadowboxing with flashy movements that looked impressive, but lacked the fundamental structure Frank had been teaching. His combinations were wild and undisciplined, designed more for cameras than effectiveness. "This is modern boxing, not some museum piece technique." The teenagers looked confused, unsure whether to trust the quiet wisdom they'd been learning or the bold confidence of youth and social media success. Frank's expression remained neutral, but his eyes reflected the pain of watching his students' faith shaken by ignorance disguised as innovation. The gym door opened again, admitting Joey DeLuca and Big Pete Ramirez, two regulars whose workday schedules allowed for afternoon training. Joey, a former cop with 45 years of street wisdom, immediately sensed the tension. Big Pete, a longshoreman whose hands could crush walnuts, but who treated the gym like a church, stopped short at seeing cameras and strangers disrupting the sacred space. "What's this circus?" Joey muttered to Pete, his cop instincts recognizing trouble when he saw it. Dante overheard and spun toward them with predatory glee. "Perfect. More exhibits for the museum. Look at these has-beens and never-weres trying to relive their glory days." His phone captured their faces, broadcasting their discomfort to thousands of strangers who treated their dignity like entertainment. The comments section exploded with cruel laughter and mocking emojis as viewers participated in the humiliation from the safety of their screens. Mickey's jaw tightened visibly as he watched decent men being degraded for sport. His hands clenched into fists before relaxing, a pattern of controlled restraint that spoke of immense willpower holding back tremendous force. Frank's voice cut through the noise with quiet authority. "Son, flashy doesn't win fights. Fundamentals do." Dante's laugh was sharp and theatrical, designed for maximum audience impact. "Listen to this dinosaur. This is exactly why American boxing is dying. Old men teaching old ways to kids who'll get destroyed by real fighters." The livestream numbers hit 3,000 as the confrontation escalated, each cruel word feeding the algorithm's hunger for engagement while destroying something precious that had taken decades to build. Dante's predatory gaze fixed on Frank's exposed forearm, where the faded ink of a 1st Cavalry Division tattoo marked him as a veteran of America's most controversial war. The young fighter's eyes lit up with the cruel excitement of someone who'd just found fresh material for his performance. "What war were you in, old man?" Dante asked loudly, ensuring his phone's microphone captured every word for his growing audience. "Vietnam." Frank nodded quietly, his military bearing preventing him from showing the discomfort that rippled through his chest. In his peripheral vision, he noticed Mickey had stopped all pretense of working, standing perfectly still near the heavy bags with an intensity that seemed to charge the air around him. "Oh, this is perfect content," Dante exclaimed, his voice dripping with false enthusiasm as his viewer count climbed past 4,000. The comments section erupted with mixed reactions, some viewers sensing something disturbing about the direction this was heading, others encouraging more dramatic content. Ashley positioned herself for the best camera angles while Tom circled with his professional equipment, both recognizing that their boss had found something that could go viral beyond their wildest hopes. The intersection of generational conflict, military service, and boxing created the perfect storm for social media engagement. "So you kill people over there?" Dante probed, his questions designed to provoke rather than honor. Do you have flashbacks during sparring? PTSD episodes when you hear loud noises? Frank's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. I served my country and came home. That's all you need to know. But Dante sensed weakness like a shark smelling blood in the water. He began pacing around Frank with theatrical movements, playing to his audience while building towards something larger. Mickey's positioning shifted subtly, moving closer to the confrontation while maintaining the facade of equipment maintenance. You know what? Dante announced with practiced spontaneity. I want to honor a veteran properly. Old school respect in the ring. How about some light sparring, soldier? Show these kids what that generation was made of. The challenge hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. Everyone in the gym understood the trap. Refuse and appear cowardly on camera. Accept and risk humiliation at the hands of a man 48 years younger. Frank's military training had prepared him for many things, but not for being ambushed by social media warfare in the place he considered sanctuary. Eddie emerged from his office, sensing catastrophe approaching. Joey and Big Pete moved closer, their protective instincts engaged as they recognized their friend being cornered by a predator. The teenage boxers watched with wide eyes, sensing something significant was about to happen, but unable to understand the deeper currents of manipulation at work. Light sparring only, Frank said finally, unable to back down without losing face in front of the kids he'd spent years teaching about courage and dignity. Educational purposes. Dante's grin widened as he realized his strategy had worked perfectly. The algorithm would reward this content beyond his wildest projections, an old veteran getting schooled by a young athlete, with every moment captured for posterity and profit. Mickey's hands slowly released the towel he'd been gripping, his knuckles showing white marks from the pressure. His dark eyes tracked every movement as both men began preparing for what everyone knew would be more than simple sparring. Eddie brought out the gloves with reluctant hands, whispering to Frank, "You don't have to do this." Frank accepted the equipment with quiet dignity. "Yeah, I do." As they began wrapping their hands, the gym fell into an unnatural silence broken only by the clicking of cameras and the soft whisper of hand wraps being secured. Mickey moved to the ring corner closest to the action, his positioning deliberate and protective, though no one yet understood who he was or what he was capable of protecting. Frank stepped through the ropes with fluid grace that surprised everyone. Watching his 72-year-old body moving with the muscle memory of a man who'd once been Brooklyn Golden Gloves champion. Despite the decades that had passed since his competitive days, his footwork remained textbook perfect. Weight balanced, knees slightly bent, hands held in the classic defensive position that had served him well in over 100 amateur bouts. Dante bounced around the ring like a peacock displaying his plumage, throwing flashy combinations at empty air while his social media audience climbed past 5,000 viewers. His movements were athletic and impressive, but Frank's experienced eye immediately spotted the fundamental flaws: dropped hands after combinations, predictable footwork patterns, and the telltale signs of a fighter who'd learned more from YouTube than from hard experience. Eddie reluctantly stepped into his role as referee, establishing ground rules that everyone knew Dante would push to their limits. Light contact only. This is educational, not competitive. The bell rang, and Frank immediately demonstrated why fundamentals mattered more than flash. As Dante charged forward with wild hooks designed for cameras, Frank simply wasn't there. His head movement was minimal but perfectly timed, slipping punches by inches while conserving energy. When opportunities presented themselves, he responded with light but precise counterpunches that found their mark with surgical accuracy. "What the hell?" Dante muttered, his first flurry having hit nothing but air. The gym regulars watched in amazement as their quiet instructor began schooling a man young enough to be his grandson. Frank's jab snapped out like a whip, disrupting Dante's rhythm and keeping him at optimal distance. His footwork created angles that left the younger fighter punching at shadows, while Frank's counters landed cleanly but with pulled power. Mickey watched from his corner position with laser focus, his entire body coiled with tension as he observed every exchange. His hands gripped the ring rope so tightly that his knuckles showed white against his dark skin, and something predatory had entered his posture, the stance of a guardian ready to spring into action. Dante's livestream comments exploded with Unexpected reactions. Viewers had expected to watch an old man get embarrassed, but instead they were witnessing a masterclass in boxing technique. Holy shit, Grandpa can fight. Scrolled past alongside heart emojis and fire symbols as Frank continued demonstrating that experience could neutralize youth when applied correctly. By the end of the second round, sweat beaded on Dante's forehead while Frank breathed steadily, his conditioning holding strong despite his age. The young fighter's confidence began cracking as he realized he was being systematically outclassed by fundamentals he dismissed as outdated. As they touched gloves for the third round, something dangerous flickered in Dante's eyes, the look of a bully who discovered his victim could fight back. The third round began with Dante abandoning all pretense of light sparring. His previous cockiness had curdled into frustration as he realized his social media audience was witnessing his humiliation rather than Frank's. With calculated malice, he began targeting Frank's left side, where an old scar showed pale against weathered skin. Frank's internal alarm bells rang as the first hard body shot landed exactly on his old wound. The impact sent familiar fire through his ribs, awakening nerve pathways that carried him back to a jungle 40 miles northwest of Saigon, 1969. The memory flashed unbidden, shrapnel from a mortar round tearing through his side while he dragged two wounded soldiers to safety, earning him a Purple Heart and a lifetime reminder of war's cost. Dante had studied Frank's movement during their previous rounds, his predatory instincts identifying the slight favor Frank showed his left side. Now he exploited that weakness with surgical precision, landing body shots that made the old veteran's breath hitch despite his legendary toughness. The gym atmosphere shifted from admiration to concern as Frank's left arm began dropping slightly, his body instinctively protecting the injured area. Through his pain, another memory surfaced, the military chaplain's solemn voice 23 years ago, informing him that his son David had died in Afghanistan, killed by an IED while trying to save his unit. The silver star they presented to Frank couldn't fill the hole in his heart or erase the guilt that maybe his military service had influenced David's decision to enlist. Eddie moved closer to the ring, ready to stop the sparring, but Dante ignored him completely. The young fighter pressed his attack with increasing brutality, systematically working Frank's injured side with the precision of someone who understood exactly what he was doing. "That's enough," Eddie called, but his voice was drowned out by the clicking of cameras and the excited murmur of Dante's crew, who recognized that genuine conflict made better content than stage drama. Mickey's entire body tensed as he watched the deliberate targeting of an old wound. His hands gripped the ring rope so hard that his knuckles cracked audibly, and something deadly entered his dark eyes, the look of a protector whose patience was being tested beyond its limits. Frank's breathing became labored as another hard shot found its mark, but his military training kept him upright and fighting. He'd endured worse pain in service to his country, and he wouldn't give this punk the satisfaction of seeing him quit in front of the kids he'd spent years teaching about courage. Joey and Big Pete moved closer to ringside, their faces grim with recognition that this had crossed the line from sparring into assault. The teenage boxers watched with growing unease, sensing something wrong but unable to fully grasp the calculated cruelty they were witnessing. Frank stumbled slightly from another targeted body shot. Catching himself on the ropes, Dante saw his opportunity for the viral knockout that would cement his social media dominance. Mickey took his first step toward the ring. With Frank hurt and vulnerable against the ropes, Dante launched into the performance he'd been building towards since entering the gym. Instead of showing the mercy any decent fighter would display, he began his planned verbal assault while his cameras captured every cruel word. "Come on, old man," Dante taunted, throwing another deliberate shot at Frank's injured ribs. "Is this how you fought in Nam? No wonder we lost that war." Ashley's livestream exploded with viewers as word spread across social media platforms. The audience climbed past 8,000 as people shared the link, drawn by the spectacle of generational conflict playing out in real time. Some viewers expressed outrage in the comments, but others encouraged more drama, their hunger for content overriding basic human decency. Frank maintained his dignity even while absorbing punishment, his military training preventing him from responding to psychological warfare with anything but silent endurance. But Dante fed off the attention like a vampire feeding on blood, his cruelty escalating with each new viewer notification. Look at this broken-down soldier. Dante continued, landing another body shot while Tom's professional camera captured every angle. Damaged goods from a damaged war. Bet you never expected to get schooled by someone who wasn't even born when you were getting your ass kicked overseas. The gym members stood frozen in horror, witnessing something that felt more like public execution than sporting competition. Mrs. Patterson, who'd returned to retrieve her forgotten water bottle, gasped and covered her mouth with trembling hands. The teenage boxers stared with wide eyes, their faith in adult protection shattered by the calculated cruelty they were witnessing. Mickey's face underwent a complete transformation, his gentle demeanor evaporating like steam. The mysterious helper who'd spent months quietly maintaining equipment now radiated barely contained violence, his massive frame coiled with the potential energy of a landslide held back by a single stone. But Dante wasn't finished. Drunk on social media power and the rush of dominating someone he'd perceived as weak, he delivered his cruelest blow, not with his fists, but with words designed to destroy whatever remained of Frank's spirit. At least your dead son won't have to see his daddy get schooled by a real fighter. The gymnasium fell into shocked silence. Even Ashley's livestream comments paused as viewers processed the vicious personal attack. 8,000 strangers had just witnessed someone weaponize a father's grief for entertainment, crossing a line that separated sport from sadism. That Frank's face went ashen, but he held his position with the quiet dignity of a man who'd faced worse enemies than social media bullies. His son David's memory deserved better than this, but he wouldn't dishonor it by breaking down in front of cameras that would turn his pain into profit. As Dante prepared to land another shot on the wounded veteran, a voice cut through the gymnasium. Like a blade forged in hell itself. That's enough. Every head turned toward the sound as Mickey stepped between the ropes, his baseball cap falling away to reveal an unmistakable face that sent shock waves through everyone present. Mike Tyson stood in the center of the ring, and the entire universe seemed to shift on its axis. The mysterious helper who'd quietly maintained equipment for months was revealed as the most feared heavyweight champion in boxing history, his presence transforming the atmosphere from cruel entertainment into something approaching divine judgment. Dante froze mid-punch, his mouth dropping open as recognition dawned like a sunrise over a graveyard. The cocky smile that had carried him through months of social media dominance cracked and fell away, replaced by the wide-eyed terror of a mouse who'd just realized he was trapped in a cage with a lion. Get away from him. Now. Mike's voice carried the quiet authority of a man who'd spent decades being obeyed without question, each word dropping like stones into still water. Ashley's livestream exploded as viewer counts hit 15,000. And climbing. Comments flooded past too fast to read as people around the world recognized the legendary boxer stepping forward to defend a humiliated veteran. The algorithm's wildest dreams were coming true, but not in the way Dante had planned. Mike moved with surprising gentleness as he helped Frank to his corner, his massive hands steadying the older man with the same care he'd shown while maintaining gym equipment. The contrast was stark. Infinite tenderness for the wounded veteran, barely contained menace directed at his tormentor. This is just sparring, Dante protested, his voice cracking as he tried to maintain his bravado for the cameras. I have rights. This is assault. Mike's patience, legendary among those who knew him well, reached its absolute limit. When Dante raised his phone to continue filming, claiming he was documenting police brutality before any police had arrived, Iron Mike decided the lesson needed to be taught in the only language bullies truly understood. The combination that followed lasted less than 3 seconds, but would be replayed millions of times across every social media platform in existence. Mike moved with the lightning speed that had terrorized heavyweight divisions, his muscle memory intact despite the years. Left hook to the body, perfectly placed to drop Dante's guard. Right uppercut to the chin, snapping the young fighter's head back with the sound of a baseball bat hitting a watermelon. Left hook to finish, delivered with just enough power to send the message without causing permanent damage. Dante collapsed like a marionette with severed strings, unconscious before he hit the canvas. His phone clattered across the ring, its camera continuing to broadcast his motionless form to an audience that had grown to 20,000 viewers in real time. The gymnasium erupted in cheers as months of quiet resentment towards social media bullying found its voice. Mickey was revealed as Iron Mike Tyson, the Brooklyn legend who'd never forgotten where he came from or what happened to people who disrespected those who'd served their country as Dante's crew scrambled to tend to their unconscious meal ticket. Mike turned to Frank with words that would echo through the old veteran's heart for the rest of his life. "You showed real heart in there, soldier." That punk learned what happens when you disrespect a warrior in front of someone who knows what honor means. The legend had revealed himself, and justice had been served with the swift brutality that made Iron Mike Tyson immortal. 30 minutes after the knockout that would eventually be viewed by over 5 million people worldwide, Murphy's boxing gym buzzed with an energy that hadn't existed in decades. Mike sat across from Frank at Eddie's small desk, two warriors sharing ice packs and quiet conversation, while Eddie locked the front door against the growing crowd of curious neighbors and opportunistic reporters already gathering outside. "Been training here 3 months," Mike explained, his distinctive voice carrying both warmth and the weight of confession. "Started coming after I read about what this place represented. Reminds me of the old Catskill gym where Cuz trained me. Real boxing, not the circus act it's become." Frank pressed ice against his ribs while studying the man who'd become legend. Before age 30, up close, away from the cameras and chaos, Mike Tyson appeared smaller somehow, more human, just a 58-year-old man seeking something he'd lost along the way to fame and infamy. "Why hide who you were?" Frank asked, genuine curiosity replacing the shock of discovery that Mike's laugh held no humor. "You try being Iron Mike Tyson in public. Everything becomes a show, a photo opportunity, people wanting pieces of you until there's nothing left. Here, I could just be Mickey, the guy who fixed equipment and watched real fighters learn real lessons." Frank shared his own story in the quiet way military men revealed their deepest wounds. Economically, without self-pity. Vietnam service with the 1st Cavalry. The Purple Heart earned dragging wounded soldiers to safety. Coming home to a country that spat on returning veterans. Finding peace in boxing's honest violence and structured discipline. The conversation deepened when Frank spoke about David, his voice steady despite the pain that flickered across his weathered face. "Lost him in Afghanistan 23 years ago. Silver Star posthumous. Sometimes I wonder if my service influenced his decision to enlist, if I'm responsible for—" "No," Mike interrupted with quiet authority. "Heroes raise heroes. Your son chose to serve because you taught him what service meant. That punk out there," he gestured toward the door, "wouldn't understand sacrifice if it bit him on his entitled ass." Their bonding was interrupted by Eddie's phone ringing incessantly. The knockout video had already appeared on 6 different social media platforms, gaining momentum like a boulder rolling downhill. News outlets were calling, requesting interviews and statements about the incident at Murphy's boxing gym. Outside, expensive cars had appeared across the street, their occupants watching the gym with the patient attention of predators observing prey. Mike noticed them through Eddie's small window, his street instincts immediately recognizing surveillance. When he saw it, "This is just the beginning," Mike warned, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd weathered media storms before. "That little shit's backers won't take this lying down. Question is, what are we fighting for here?" Frank's answer came without hesitation. "Everything that matters." The next morning brought revelation with the sunrise. Frank arrived to find Eddie surrounded by newspapers and laptops, his face grim as he absorbed the overnight media coverage that had transformed their small victory into something much larger and more dangerous. "You need to see this," Eddie said, pointing to his computer screen where a CNN article bore the headline, "Boxing Legend Assaults Young Athlete at Brooklyn Gym." The accompanying video, edited to remove most of Dante's verbal assault, made Mike appear to be the aggressor attacking an innocent young man. But the real revelation came from investigative journalism that had worked through the night. A sports reporter named Maria Santos had connected dots that Eddie and Frank hadn't seen, exposing the web of corporate interests behind Dante's gym appearances. "Pinnacle Development Group," Frank read aloud, scrolling through the damning connections. "They've been buying up the neighborhood systematically, targeting community institutions that resist gentrification. Eddie's face went ashen as he recognized the name. They've been sending me purchase offers for 8 months. Started low, but the pressure kept increasing. I thought it was just normal real estate speculation. The morning news played on Eddie's small television, showing Marcus Sterling, Pinnacle CEO, in a perfectly tailored suit expressing deep concern about violence at community boxing gyms. His performance was masterful, reasonable tone, worried expression, carefully chosen words that painted Murphy's gym as a relic that endangered public safety. These incidents highlight the need for modern oversight, Sterling told the camera. Community facilities must meet contemporary standards for safety and appropriate behavior. We cannot allow nostalgia to override public welfare. The morning talk shows picked up the narrative, featuring expert discussions about violence in amateur boxing and the liability of allowing untrained individuals to operate community programs. Dante appeared via satellite link, his bruised face serving as visual evidence while he spun his story of being assaulted by a convicted felon with a history of violence. Frank felt the walls closing in as he understood the scope of the trap they'd walked into. This wasn't about social media content or generational conflict. It was about systematic destruction of community institutions that stood in the way of corporate profit. Mike arrived as the morning news cycle reached full fury, immediately grasping the situation after Eddie explained the connections. His street wisdom, honed by decades of navigating predatory business practices, recognized a coordinated attack when he saw it. "How bad?" Mike asked, his voice carrying the calm of a man who'd faced worse storms. Eddie reluctantly spread financial documents across his desk. 3 months behind on rent. Insurance rates tripled after the violent incident. Building maintenance mysteriously delayed, while citations piled up for safety violations that hadn't existed the previous week. "They're not just coming for your gym," Mike said, his voice hardening as he studied the systematic campaign. "They're coming for everything this place represents. Question is, are we going to let them win?" Frank looked around the gym that had become his sanctuary, then at the man who'd revealed himself as both legend and protector. They picked the wrong fight. Mike's first official training session began at dawn, transforming Murphy's gym into something approaching a sacred cathedral of boxing knowledge. The regular fighters, Frank, Joey, Big Pete, and 3 teenage amateurs including Bobby, stood in semicircle as the legendary trainer prepared to share wisdom earned through decades of violence and victory. "Boxing is 90% mental," Mike began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd proven the statement in the most unforgiving arena imaginable. "The physical part, that's just expressing what your mind has already decided. Cuz taught me that before I knew how to shave." With Frank, Mike worked with the respect one craftsman shows another, refining techniques rather than rebuilding foundations. The old veteran's footwork needed minor adjustments for his age, but his understanding of distance and timing remained sharp. Mike helped him adapt his style to accommodate the old shrapnel wound while maximizing his natural advantages. "You've got ring intelligence they can't teach," Mike told Frank as they worked the mitts. "Use their youth against them. Let them punch themselves tired, then show them what experience means." The teenage boxers received different instruction, focused on building character alongside technique. Mike emphasized respect for opponents, for the sport, for the discipline required to excel. He shared stories of his own youth, the anger and confusion that Cus D'Amato had channeled into productive violence. "Every fighter is afraid," Mike explained to Bobby, who'd asked the question that revealed his deepest insecurity. "The difference is what you do with that fear. You can let it paralyze you, or you can use it to sharpen your focus until you see opportunities others miss." With Joey and Big Pete, Mike worked on practical applications, self-defense techniques that could save their lives, conditioning routines that accommodated their day jobs, and the mental aspects of confrontation that applied far beyond boxing. Rings. "Fighting isn't about being the toughest guy in the room," Mike instructed as Joey worked the heavy bag. "It's about being so prepared that you don't have to find out who's toughest." Throughout the session, Mike's philosophy emerged through demonstration rather than lecture. Boxing didn't build character. It revealed character that already existed. Discipline created opportunities that talent alone couldn't reach. Respect for opponents began with respect for yourself and the craft that connected all fighters across generations. The training montage that followed showed each fighter improving rapidly under Mike's guidance. His legendary intensity, tempered by the wisdom of age and hard experience, brought out potential they hadn't known they possessed. Frank's combinations became sharper, Joey's confidence grew, Big Pete discovered power he'd forgotten he owned, and the teenagers began moving like real boxers rather than athletic pretenders. As the session ended, Bobby approached Mike with the tentative steps of a child seeking wisdom from an adult he'd learned to trust. "Mr. Tyson," Bobby said quietly, "were you scared when you fought all those big guys?" Mike knelt to the boy's level, understanding that this question carried weight far beyond boxing. "Every single time. But you know what I learned? Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's feeling afraid and doing what's right anyway." 1 week after the viral video transformed Murphy's gym from neighborhood institution into international curiosity, the small boxing club experienced both the blessing and curse of sudden fame. Lines of hopeful visitors stretched around the block each morning, mixing genuine boxing enthusiasts with social media tourists hoping to catch glimpses of Iron Mike Tyson in his natural habitat. Mike handled the attention with practiced patience, signing autographs and taking photos while making it clear that Murphy's remained a working gym where serious training took precedence over celebrity worship. His presence attracted legitimate fighters seeking knowledge, but also drew protesters carrying signs reading, "Violence is not a sport," and shut down Murphy's. The media circus provided perfect cover for subtler forms of warfare. Health inspectors began arriving with suspicious frequency, citing violations that hadn't existed the previous month. Noise complaints flooded the local precinct despite Murphy's having operated at the same volume for 35 years. Building maintenance requests, previously handled within days, now languished in bureaucratic limbo while safety concerns piled up like autumn leaves that Mike's trained eye recognized the pattern of systematic harassment designed to overwhelm small businesses with compliance costs they couldn't afford. His street wisdom, earned through decades of dealing with predatory promoters and corrupt officials, immediately identified the coordinated nature of the assault. "They're not even trying to hide it," Mike observed as Eddie showed him the latest citation for inadequate ventilation in a building that had passed identical inspections 6 months earlier. Question is, how long can you hold out financially? Eddie's answer revealed the desperate reality behind his calm exterior. Insurance premiums had tripled overnight, citing the violent incident as evidence of increased liability. The building owner, previously supportive of the gym's community mission, now demanded immediate repairs for violations that had appeared simultaneously with the media attention. Frank continued working with Bobby and the other young fighters, but the stress was taking its toll. His left side ached more frequently, and Mike noticed the old veteran favoring his wounded ribs during training sessions. The systematic campaign was designed to exhaust them emotionally and financially before delivering the final blow. The evening training session was interrupted by flashing lights outside, police cars, and an ambulance responding to reports of a disturbance with weapons. The false alarm cost them an hour of training time, while officers searched the gym and questioned members about non-existent threats. As the police finally departed, Mike found Frank standing alone by the heavy bags, staring at photographs of past champions who'd learned their craft in the same space now under siege by corporate interests and bureaucratic warfare. "They're not going to stop," Frank said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of a man who'd seen too many good things destroyed by forces beyond individual control. But Mike's response carried the authority of someone who'd never learned to surrender. "Then we make them regret starting this fight. They want to play dirty? They just picked a war with someone who wrote the book on surviving dirty games." Outside, expensive cars continued their patient surveillance, their occupants documenting everyone who entered or left the gym. The second phase of Pinnacle Development's campaign was beginning, and Murphy's boxing gym stood directly in the crosshairs of a billion-dollar gentrification project that viewed community institutions as obstacles to profit. The media war erupted with coordinated precision that revealed months of careful planning. Morning news programs across the tri-state area featured carefully edited footage of Mike's intervention, with Dante's verbal assault on Frank strategically removed to transform justified protection into unprovoked violence. Dante appeared on 3 different shows within 24 hours, his bruised face serving as visual evidence while he spun his narrative of victimization. His performance was masterful. Vulnerable young athlete brutalized by a convicted felon with a documented history of violence, who should never have been allowed near impressionable children. All I wanted was to show respect to a veteran, Dante told sympathetic hosts who nodded along with his carefully rehearsed lies. Instead, I was assaulted by someone who clearly hasn't learned to control his anger after all these years. Marcus Sterling appeared alongside him on the most influential programs, his expensive suit and measured tone lending credibility to their coordinated message. As Pinnacle Development CEO, he expressed deep concern for community safety while suggesting that outdated facilities like Murphy's Gym required modern oversight and contemporary safety standards. The narrative shift was surgical in its effectiveness. Social media influencers who'd initially celebrated Mike's defense of Frank now backpedaled, afraid of being associated with toxic masculinity and glorification of violence. Corporate sponsors of youth boxing programs quietly distanced themselves from anything connected to Murphy's Gym. Eddie watched his life's work crumble as parents stopped bringing their children for training. The after-school program that had kept dozens of neighborhood kids off dangerous streets emptied as mothers chose safety over character development. Phone calls came hourly, cancellations, complaints, and lawyers offering settlements if Eddie would simply close quietly. Mrs. Patterson stopped coming for her senior fitness classes after neighbors warned her about that violent place where old men get beaten up. The domino effect spread through the community as fear replaced the trust that had taken Eddie 35 years to build. Frank found himself increasingly isolated, feeling responsible for bringing destruction to the sanctuary he'd loved. The guilt ate at him like acid. His presence had made Murphy's a target. His acceptance of Dante's challenge had provided the ammunition for their systematic destruction. "This is my fault," Frank told Mike during a quiet moment between training sessions. "I should have walked away, let him have his show." Mike's response carried the authority of someone who'd faced character assassination campaigns before. "Walking away just teaches bullies that their tactics work. They were always coming for this place. You just gave them an excuse to show their true nature." The evening news brought fresh horror as graffiti appeared on Murphy's exterior walls. "Violence is not a sport" in red spray paint, alongside "Shut down Murphy's" and crude drawings suggesting the gym promoted dangerous behavior. Mike discovered broken windows in the back alley, the glass deliberately scattered to suggest vandalism, while actually representing escalation in Pinnacle's campaign. The message was clear. Media attacks were just the beginning. In the quiet hours between afternoon and evening training sessions, Frank and Mike sat alone in the gym as golden light streamed through windows that bore fresh cracks from the previous night's vandalism. The space felt different now, heavy with the weight of systematic assault, haunted by the absence of children who'd once filled it with laughter and determination. That Frank's voice carried the careful cadence of a military briefing, as he finally shared the full story of his son David's death. 23 years ago, outside Kandahar, his unit was returning from patrol when the IED went off. David threw himself on top of 2 younger soldiers, saved their lives with his body. The Silver Star ceremony had been a blur of formal condolences and military precision, Frank explained. He'd stood at attention while generals praised David's sacrifice, but all he could think about was teaching his boy to throw a jab in this same gym when David was 12 years old, the same age Bobby was now. "Sometimes I wonder if my service influenced his decision to enlist," Frank continued, his weathered hands gripping a coffee cup like an anchor. "If I'm responsible for putting him in harm's way by teaching him that some things are worth dying for." Mike's response came from depths of personal experience with loss and guilt that few men ever explored. "I lost my daughter Exodus when she was 4 years old. Treadmill accident while I was traveling, making money I thought mattered more than being home with her." The legendary fighter's voice cracked slightly as he shared how that loss had changed everything. His understanding of what truly mattered, his relationship with violence, his desperate search for meaning beyond championship belts and momentary glory. "For years I blamed myself, thought maybe if I'd been there, maybe if I'd chosen family over fame. Mike's words trailed off before returning with quiet authority. But guilt is just another form of pride, thinking we control more than we actually do. Your son chose to serve because you taught him what service meant. That's on him, not you. There. Conversation was interrupted by the sound of small footsteps echoing through the gym. Bobby appeared in the doorway, his backpack slung over one shoulder, and excitement lighting his young face despite the troubles surrounding them. Grandpa, Mr. Tyson, I've been practicing my shadowboxing like you showed me. Want to see? Frank's face transformed as he watched his grandson demonstrate the combinations they'd worked on, each movement showing improvement and dedication that proved the value of what they were fighting to preserve. The boy's enthusiasm cut through the heavy atmosphere like sunlight through storm clouds. Mike observed the grandfather-grandson bond with the eye of someone who understood what was truly at stake. This wasn't just about saving a gym. It was about preserving the relationships and values that gave meaning to Frank's life after so much loss. As Bobby began working with Frank on the light bag, Mike felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a familiar coat. The phone in Eddie's office rang insistently, another crisis demanding attention. But for this moment, they had what mattered most: the next generation learning lessons that would serve them long after the current battle ended. Eddie's office resembled a war room as legal documents covered his desk like fallen leaves. The Golden Gloves regional qualifiers loomed just 4 days away, representing Murphy's Gym's best opportunity to generate positive publicity and attract new members who valued boxing's traditional lessons over social media spectacle. Frank had been preparing 3 young fighters with the methodical patience of a master craftsman. Bobby, despite his small stature, showed natural defensive instincts that reminded veteran observers of legendary counterpunchers. Marcus Williams displayed raw power that needed only refinement to become devastating. Kevin Torres possessed the ring intelligence that separated true boxers from mere athletes. Under Mike's intensive coaching, all 3 boys had developed rapidly. His legendary training methods, adapted for young minds, emphasized mental preparation alongside physical conditioning. They learned to see openings others missed, to remain calm under pressure, and to understand that boxing was chess played at light speed. These kids could go all the way to state championships, Mike told Eddie as they reviewed tournament brackets. Good boxing story beats manufactured controversy every time. Media loves comebacks and underdogs. But the legal pressure was mounting like water behind a failing dam. Building inspectors had issued citations for safety violations that would cost $15,000 to remedy, money the gym didn't possess. Business licenses were under review due to multiple complaints from neighbors who'd never previously expressed concerns about Murphy's operations. Insurance costs had tripled overnight, with carriers citing the violent incident as evidence of unacceptable liability risk. The building owner, previously supportive of Eddie's community mission, now demanded immediate compliance with violations that had appeared simultaneously with media attention. Eddie spread the financial reality across his desk with the grim precision of a man calculating his own execution. We need the tournament prize money and the publicity boost just to survive. Without both, we're finished by month's end. Mike offered to cover all expenses, his professional earnings having provided financial security that most fighters never achieved. But Eddie refused charity with the stubborn pride of a man who'd built something meaningful through his own sweat and sacrifice. This place succeeds on its own merit, or it doesn't succeed at all, Eddie declared. Taking handouts turns us into another rich man's hobby instead of a community institution. Frank supported Eddie's position, understanding that accepting Mike's money would fundamentally change Murphy's character. The gym's value lay not in expensive equipment or celebrity endorsements, but in proving that dedication and proper instruction could transform lives regardless of economic advantages. The team committed to their tournament strategy, but their planning session was interrupted by sirens outside. Through Eddie's small window, they watched an ambulance at the building where Mrs. Patterson lived, her elderly neighbor being loaded onto a stretcher after suffering what appeared to be a stress-induced heart attack. Frank rushed across the street with Mike following. Their protective instincts engaged as they learned that Mrs. Patterson had been visited by developers who'd claimed the neighborhood was becoming dangerous due to that violent boxing gym that attracted criminal elements. the systematic campaign, had claimed its first casualty, and everyone understood the message. Pinnacle Development would destroy anyone who stood in their way. The night before the Golden Gloves qualifiers, Murphy's gym hummed with positive energy that felt almost magical. The three teenage fighters were as prepared as Frank's 40 years of coaching experience could make them, their techniques sharpened by Mike's legendary wisdom and their spirits elevated by the community support that had rallied around them. Despite the media assault, Bobby shadowboxed with fluid precision, his defensive skills developing beyond his 12 years. Marcus and Kevin worked the heavy bags with controlled power that spoke of real preparation rather than flashy showmanship. Even Eddie allowed himself cautious optimism as local news outlets expressed interest in covering the tournament, potentially shifting narrative from controversy to inspiration. At exactly 11 p.m., the coordinated destruction began. Health inspectors arrived with a court order to shut down Murphy's gym immediately, citing imminent health hazards that required investigation. Before any further activities could occur, the violations listed asbestos concerns, ventilation inadequacy, structural safety questions were fabricated but legally binding until challenged through processes that could take weeks. Frank was arguing with the lead inspector when the chest pains began. The stress of watching his sanctuary being destroyed triggered the heart episode he'd been fighting off for months, his body finally surrendering to pressures that his will had refused to acknowledge. As paramedics worked on Frank, Eddie received the phone call that confirmed their worst fears. Dante had filed formal assault charges against Mike, claiming delayed symptoms from traumatic brain injury required him to seek justice through proper legal channels. Police were en route with an arrest warrant. The nightmare escalated when Marcus Sterling arrived with private security guards and a camera crew, ostensibly to document the dangerous conditions that justified emergency closure. His presence transformed the scene from bureaucratic harassment into orchestrated theater designed for maximum humiliation. But Sterling had saved his cruelest surprise for last. A black limousine pulled up outside the gym, and a mountain of a man emerged, Thunder Thompson, professional heavyweight with a record of 23-2 and a reputation for ending careers. At 6'4" and 240 pounds of perfectly conditioned muscle, he represented everything Mike had once been, but 40 years younger. Iron Mike, Thunder called out as paramedics loaded Frank into the ambulance. You owe me a fight from back in the day. Tomorrow night, warehouse on the pier. Winner takes all. Your boys' charges disappear if you win, but when I destroy you, this whole community learns that legends don't age gracefully. The challenge was delivered with cameras rolling, ensuring Mike couldn't back down without appearing cowardly to the same social media audience that had witnessed his intervention. Sterling's smile revealed the trap's perfection. Accept and face probable defeat against a prime athlete, or refuse and confirm that time had finally conquered Iron Mike Tyson. As Frank was loaded into the ambulance, his frightened eyes met Mike's through the rear window. With tears streaming down his weathered face, the old veteran whispered words that would haunt Mike through the darkest night of his life. Don't let them destroy what we built. The gym stood empty as police tape blocked the entrance, and Mike faced the reality that everything they'd fought to preserve hung in the balance of one man's fists. The hospital waiting room at 3 a.m. felt like purgatory rendered in fluorescent lighting and antiseptic smells. Mike sat between Eddie and Bobby, the 12-year-old's eyes red from crying as he feared losing another family member after already watching his father's flag-draped coffin disappear into Arlington National Cemetery. Doctors emerged periodically, with updates delivered in the careful language of medical professionals who'd learned to balance hope with reality. Frank's heart episode was stress-induced rather than structural, his cardiovascular system overwhelmed by weeks of systematic pressure rather than damaged by disease. The prognosis was cautiously optimistic. He would survive, but recovery required eliminating the sources of anxiety that had triggered the crisis. When Frank was finally stable enough for visitors, Bobby rushed to his grandfather's bedside with the desperate affection of a child who'd already lost too much. Mike followed more slowly, his legendary composure cracking as he saw the proud veteran reduced to hospital gown vulnerability. But Frank's first words revealed devastating news that transformed their crisis from temporary setback into potential catastrophe. Mickey, he whispered, using the old nickname with affection born of trust. I need to tell you something I should have mentioned weeks ago. The confession came in halting sentences punctuated by heart monitor beeps. Frank had mortgaged his house 6 months earlier to help Eddie keep Murphy's gym running during its financial difficulties. The decision had been made quietly, without fanfare or expectation of recognition, just an old soldier's way of protecting something he valued, more than personal security. If the gym closes permanently, I lose everything, Frank admitted, his voice carrying the weight of a man confronting the destruction of his final years. House, savings, Bobby's college fund, all of it tied up in keeping those doors open. Bobby's sobs filled the quiet room as he understood that his grandfather's generosity might cost them their home. The boy had already lost his father to war and his mother to grief-induced depression that required ongoing treatment. Frank's house represented the only stability left in a young life that had absorbed too much loss. Mike felt the full weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like Atlas accepting the world's burden. Walking away wasn't an option, too. Many innocent people would suffer for corporate greed disguised as development progress. "I'm taking Thunder's fight," Mike announced, his voice carrying the finality of a man who'd made peace with dangerous choices. Tomorrow night, warehouse. On the pier, Eddie started to protest the risk, but Frank's weak hand gripped Mike's wrist with surprising strength. "You don't have to do this for us." Mike's response carried the authority of someone who'd spent decades understanding the difference between having to do something and choosing to do it. "Yeah, I do. Some things are worth fighting for regardless of the odds. This is one of them." Mike returned to the sealed gym like a ghost visiting his own grave. Police tape stretched across the entrance in yellow ribbons of bureaucratic authority, but the back door yielded to his knowledge of the building's weaknesses. Locks Eddie had never quite managed to fix properly, windows that opened with the right combination of pressure and patience. Inside, Murphy's gym felt hollow without the sounds of training, the echo of his footsteps unnaturally loud in the space that had once buzzed with life and purpose. Dust motes danced in shafts of afternoon light streaming through cracked windows, and the heavy bags hung motionless like sleeping giants awaiting their master's return. Mike began his preparation ritual with the methodical precision that had made him legendary. At 58, his body required different treatment than the machine that had terrorized heavyweight divisions in his prime, but the mental discipline remained unchanged. He started with shadowboxing, his movements flowing like deadly poetry. As muscle memory awakened skills that time had dulled but never destroyed, the training montage that followed would have impressed Cuz D'Amato himself. Mike pushed his aging body through routines that would have broken men half his age, his legendary intensity returning in full force as he prepared for the most important fight of his later life. Each punch thrown into the heavy bag carried the weight of everything he was fighting to preserve. Word of the warehouse fight spread through underground boxing networks like wildfire. Thunder Thompson represented everything Mike had once feared: youth, size, modern training methods, and the confidence that came from never having been truly tested by time's cruelest lessons. At 6'4" and 240 pounds, Thunder possessed physical advantages that couldn't be overcome through nostalgia or reputation alone. As evening approached, former Murphy's gym members began arriving despite the police tape and media warnings. Joey DeLuca came first, followed by Big Pete Ramirez, then dozens of others who'd learned life lessons within these walls over the decades. Mrs. Patterson appeared despite her age and recent health scare, determined to support the man who'd protected her community. The warehouse location took shape like something from underground boxing's golden age. A regulation ring surrounded by folding chairs and harsh overhead lights, the atmosphere charged with anticipation that transcended mere sport. This felt like something elemental. Old-school values confronting modern corporate power in the most honest arena imaginable. Mike's final preparation was interrupted by a visitor he hadn't expected. Frank appeared in a wheelchair pushed by Bobby, the old veteran having discharged himself from the hospital against medical advice to witness what might be Iron Mike Tyson's final fight. "Can't let you do this alone," Frank said simply, extending his hand to reveal his son David's dog tags, the Silver Star recipient's most precious possession. These brought David courage when he needed it most. "Maybe they'll help you too." Mike accepted the sacred gift with the reverence it deserved, understanding that he now carried the hopes and dreams of everyone who believed that some things were worth defending regardless of the cost. The warehouse filled with an eclectic crowd that resembled a United Nations of boxing appreciation. Underground fight enthusiasts mixed with neighborhood residents. Legitimate media representatives sat beside social media influencers, and longtime Murphy's Gym supporters found themselves sharing oxygen with Pinnacle Development's expensive suits and private security teams. Mike arrived to find the space divided like a medieval battlefield, his supporters clustering on one side, while Sterling's contingent occupied premium positions near the ring. The contrast was stark: working-class loyalty versus corporate power, authentic community versus manufactured influence. Marcus Sterling appeared in his element, surrounded by lawyers and enforcers who radiated the quiet menace of men accustomed to getting their way through systematic pressure rather than dramatic confrontation. His smile carried the satisfaction of a predator who'd successfully cornered his prey after months of patient stalking. "Gentlemen," Sterling addressed the crowd with the practiced authority of someone who conducted business in boardrooms and back rooms with equal facility. "Tonight we settle more than a personal dispute. We determine whether nostalgia and violence have any place in modern community development." The revelation of Pinnacle's full plan came with clinical precision that revealed months of strategic thinking. Murphy's Gym was just the beginning. Sterling wanted the entire block for a massive luxury development that would transform the neighborhood's character permanently. The boxing gym had become a symbol of resistance that needed to be crushed before other community institutions found the courage to oppose corporate inevitability. "If Mr. Tyson loses tonight," Sterling continued, his voice carrying the weight of legal authority, "he'll face additional assault charges that will ensure imprisonment. The community will learn that violence doesn't solve modern problems, and development will proceed as planned." But Sterling's confidence extended beyond mere legal maneuvering. "However, if he somehow manages to defeat Thunder Thompson, a professional athlete in his prime, I'll personally drop all legal challenges and provide $50,000 for gym renovations. Fair terms for an impossible outcome." Thunder Thompson proved to be more than just physical intimidation. At 28, he possessed the articulate intelligence of someone who understood boxing's mental aspects as well as its physical demands. His professional record of 23-2 included victories over legitimate contenders, and his conditioning reflected the advantages of modern sports science applied to natural athletic gifts. "I respect what you accomplished, Mr. Tyson," Thunder said during the pre-fight ceremonies, his voice carrying genuine appreciation rather than typical trash talk. "But legends belong in history books, not active competition. Tonight, I prove that the new generation deserves respect over nostalgia." The contrast was impossible to ignore. Thunder at 6'4" and 240 pounds of perfectly conditioned youth versus Mike at 5'10" and 220 pounds, carrying 58 years of accumulated damage from wars fought in rings around the world. Both fighters prepared in makeshift corners. Mike saw Bobby and the other young fighters from Murphy's Gym enter with Frank, who'd insisted on witnessing the fight despite his recent hospitalization. The emotional stakes reached their peak as Mike realized he was fighting for the future of every person in that warehouse who believed community values could survive corporate assault. The makeshift ring stood illuminated like a coliseum under harsh warehouse lights that cast dramatic shadows across the assembled crowd. Mike and Thunder Thompson faced each other during introductions, the physical contrast stark enough to make casual observers wonder if the older fighter had lost his mind accepting such an obviously mismatched confrontation. Thunder moved with the fluid confidence of a professional athlete in his prime, his 6'4" frame carrying 240 pounds of muscle that represented the pinnacle of modern training methods. His reach advantage was immediately apparent as he loosened up with combinations that showcased both power and speed. Mike appeared smaller than his legend suggested, but those who understood boxing recognized the deceptive nature of his compact build. At 58, he'd lost some of the explosive speed that had made him terrifying, but his ring intelligence remained sharp as a surgeon's blade. The opening bell triggered Thunder's game plan: use his 7-inch reach advantage to keep Mike at distance while peppering him with jabs that accumulated damage over time. The strategy was sound, based on the assumption that age had slowed Iron Mike enough to make him vulnerable to systematic punishment. But Mike demonstrated immediately why ring intelligence trumped athletic advantages. He slipped Thunder's jabs with minimal head movement, conserving energy while getting inside the younger fighter's reach to work the body. His combinations were shorter than in his prime, but surgically precise, each punch serving a specific purpose in breaking down Thunder's defense. The first 3 rounds showcased vintage Tyson adapted for mature purposes. Mike's legendary uppercuts snapped Thunder's head back, his hooks to the body forced grimaces of pain, and his psychological warfare, constant pressure, intimidating stare, aggressive forward movement, began affecting Thunder's confidence. "You're telegraphing that right hand," Mike told Thunder during a clinch, the psychological warfare that had destroyed so many opponents over the decades. "Your left foot's giving away everything you're planning." Thunder's frustration began showing, as Mike seemed to anticipate every combination, slipping punches that should have landed and countering with shots that found their mark despite the reach disadvantage. The crowd sensed momentum shifting as experience began overwhelming youth. But by the 4th round, Father Time began collecting his inevitable toll. Mike's breathing became labored while Thunder seemed to gain energy, his superior conditioning starting to show as the pace remained high. The younger fighter's confidence returned as he realized Iron Mike was mortal after all. Thunder began landing harder shots, his jabs snapping Mike's head back, while his power punches forced the legend to cover up more frequently. The crowd's cheers became more anxious as they watched their hero absorbing punishment that would have finished lesser men. Round 5 ended with Mike backed against the ropes, his legendary defense tested by Thunder's increasing aggression. In his corner, Eddie splashed water on Mike's face while delivering the advice that would define the fight's final act. "Stop trying to be young, Mike. Be wise, Mike. Use everything you've learned." Mike's eyes cleared as he understood exactly what he needed to do. Round 6 began with Mike implementing the wisdom Eddie had delivered between rounds. Instead of trying to match Thunder's youth and conditioning, he began fighting with the accumulated knowledge of 3 decades spent studying human nature under extreme pressure. "You're dropping your left hand after combinations," Mike observed during their first clinch, his voice carrying the conversational tone of a professor correcting a student's mistake. "Your footwork's telling me exactly where you're going before. You know it yourself." Thunder's confidence wavered as Mike began demonstrating the difference between physical gifts and ring intelligence. The psychological warfare that had destroyed prime fighters like Michael Spinks and Larry Holmes emerged from decades of dormancy, refined by maturity into something approaching art. Mike started talking during exchanges the way Muhammad Ali had done, not trash talk, but observations that penetrated Thunder's mental defenses more effectively than any punch could reach his body. "You're fighting angry now instead of smart. That's when mistakes happen." The tide turned when Mike stopped trying to be the devastating puncher of his youth and became something more dangerous, a master craftsman who understood that boxing was chess played at light speed. His combinations became surgical, each punch serving multiple purposes in dismantling Thunder's game plan. Thunder threw a wild right hand born of frustration, and Mike slipped it with minimal movement while countering with an uppercut that traveled less than 6 inches but landed with devastating precision. The younger fighter's legs wobbled as he realized he was no longer fighting just a man, but a legend who'd remembered why legends become legendary. "Power doesn't come from muscles," Mike explained as he systematically broke down Thunder's defense with combinations that seemed impossible to defend. "It comes from perfect timing, correct distance, and knowing exactly when your opponent is vulnerable." The crowd began sensing something special happening as Mike's legendary aura returned in full force. This wasn't just an aging fighter refusing to quit. This was Iron Mike Tyson demonstrating why his name had terrorized heavyweight divisions for decades. Thunder, despite his physical advantages, began fighting Mike's fight instead of his own. The mental trap that had destroyed so many opponents was springing closed as the younger fighter tried to match intensity with someone who'd invented the game he was attempting to play. The psychological dominance was complete when Thunder threw a desperate combination and Mike countered with the speed that had made him legendary. Left hook to the body that folded Thunder slightly, followed by the uppercut that defined Mike's career. A shot that traveled from Thunder's belt to his chin in a perfect arc. Round 7 ended with Thunder wobbled and uncertain for the first time in his professional career, his legs unsteady as he returned to his corner. Mike stood in the opposite corner, breathing hard but with fire in his eyes that reminded everyone why some legends never truly die. The eighth and final round began with both fighters understanding that everything, Murphy's gym, Frank's house, Bobby's future, the community's soul, would be determined in the next 3 minutes. Thunder came out desperately aggressive, his survival instincts demanding a knockout before Mike's psychological dominance could complete its devastating work. Thunder threw everything he possessed at Mike, combinations that showcased his youth, power, and professional conditioning. He landed several hard shots that would have finished ordinary men, his desperation creating moments of brilliance that reminded everyone why he'd been chosen for this fight. But Mike absorbed the punishment with the legendary toughness that had carried him through wars against Evander Holyfield and Lennox Lewis. He used the rope-a-dope strategy he'd studied from Ali's playbook, letting Thunder punch himself toward exhaustion while conserving energy for the moment that was coming. With less than a minute remaining, Thunder dropped his hands slightly after a wild combination that had emptied his gas tank. Mike saw the opening with the predatory instincts that had made him the youngest heavyweight champion in boxing history. The final combination was pure poetry written in violence, poetry that connected Mike Tyson to every great fighter who'd ever stepped through ropes to settle matters that words couldn't resolve. Left hook to the body, delivered with surgical precision to the liver, doubling Thunder over and setting up the conclusion that everyone knew was coming. The uppercut that followed was Mike Tyson's signature punctuation mark, a shot that traveled from Thunder's belt to his chin in a perfect arc that contained 3 decades of accumulated wisdom about distance, timing, and the moment when resistance becomes futile. Thunder's head snapped back as his legs betrayed him, sending him crashing to the canvas like a demolished building. The referee's count echoed through the warehouse as Thunder struggled to regain his feet, his warrior's heart demanding he continue fighting even as his body refused to cooperate. At the count of 8, he managed to stand, but his glassy eyes told the story that his pride wouldn't allow his mouth to speak. The referee waved off the fight as Thunder swayed like a tree in a hurricane, and the warehouse erupted in pandemonium. That could probably be heard 3 blocks away. Mike Tyson had done the impossible, defeated time itself through sheer force of will and the accumulated wisdom of a lifetime spent learning that true strength protects rather than destroys. But the victory's most important moment came when Mike immediately moved to help Thunder to his feet, showing the respect for a worthy opponent that defined true champions. As he supported the younger fighter, Mike whispered words that only Thunder could hear. "You fought with heart. That matters more than winning." Marcus Sterling approached with the contract he'd promised, his face showing the grudging respect of a man who'd underestimated the power of community bonds forged in fire. The check for gym renovations was signed with hands that trembled slightly, not from fear, but from recognition that some things couldn't be purchased or demolished. 1 month after the warehouse fight that had been viewed by over 10 million people across social media platforms, Murphy's boxing gym reopened with a block party that transformed the surrounding streets into a celebration of community resilience. The renovations had preserved every element of the gym's character while updating safety features and equipment that made training more effective without sacrificing authenticity. The transformation extended far beyond physical improvements. The gym now attracted a membership that bridged generational gaps with remarkable effectiveness. Old-school boxers training alongside newcomers drawn by Mike's presence and Frank's patient wisdom. The waiting list for classes stretched 2 months into the future, with applications coming from families who understood they were joining something more valuable than a fitness facility. Thunder Thompson had become one of the gym's most dedicated trainers, his humbling defeat having taught him lessons about respect and humility that no previous victory had provided. He worked especially well with teenage fighters who responded to his combination of modern techniques and hard-earned wisdom about the mental aspects of competition. "Losing that fight was the best thing that ever happened to my career," Thunder admitted during an interview with ESPN. "Mike Tyson taught me that being a fighter means more than winning. It means understanding what you're fighting for." Bobby Kowalski's first amateur victory came 3 weeks after the gym's reopening, his defensive skills and ring intelligence reflecting the patient instruction he'd received from both Frank and Mike. The 12-year-old's performance demonstrated that the values being taught at Murphy's could compete successfully against flashier programs that emphasized athleticism over character development. Mrs. Patterson had returned to lead a seniors fitness class that combined basic boxing movements with physical therapy, proving that the gym served community members from 8 to 88 years old. Her recovery from the stress-induced health problems had been remarkable once the source of community tension was resolved. The most surprising development came when Dante Williams appeared at the gym's reopening ceremony, not for publicity or social media content, but to offer a genuine apology and request the opportunity to train properly under Frank's guidance. His humiliation by Mike had apparently triggered serious self-reflection about the difference between fame and respect. "I want to learn real boxing," Dante told Frank privately, his previous arrogance replaced by something approaching humility. Not the social media version, the version that builds character instead of just building followers. Frank's response reflected the military philosophy that had guided his entire adult life. Everyone deserves a second chance to do the right thing. But respect has to be earned through actions, not words. As the celebration continued into the evening, Mike and Frank sat together watching Bobby spar with one of Thunder's students, a perfectly controlled exchange that emphasized technique over aggression, respect over dominance. The sight of 3 generations working together represented everything they'd fought to preserve. "You saved more than just a gym," Frank told Mike as they observed the bustling activity around them. "You saved a way of life that teaches people what strength is really for." Mike's response carried the satisfaction of a man who'd finally found the redemption he'd been seeking. "You saved me first, Frank. You reminded me that legends aren't made by what they accomplish. They're made by what they protect." 6 months after the warehouse fight that had become legend, Murphy's boxing gym stood as a model for community-based athletic programs nationwide. Mike's presence had attracted media attention that transformed local success into national inspiration, with delegations visiting from other cities seeking to replicate their approach to youth development through traditional boxing instruction. The gym's success had created ripple effects throughout the neighborhood that surprised even the most optimistic supporters. Property values had stabilized as the community proved it could resist gentrification while embracing positive change. Local businesses reported increased foot traffic from visitors who came to see Iron Mike's gym, but stayed to explore shops and restaurants that reflected the area's authentic character. Frank had fully recovered from his heart episode and expanded his role beyond simple boxing instruction. The new veteran support program paired combat veterans with young athletes, creating mentorship opportunities that addressed trauma while building character. The program's success had attracted funding from organizations nationwide that recognized its potential for replication in other communities. Mike had established the Murphy's Foundation, ensuring that similar gyms in other cities could access resources needed to serve their communities effectively. The foundation's mission statement was simple: teaching young people that true strength protects rather than destroys, and that character matters more than championships. Bobby, now 13 and seasoned beyond his years, had become an unofficial assistant instructor who worked with younger children new to the program. His development from frightened boy to confident young man symbolized the successful transmission of values from one generation to the next. The most remarkable transformation belonged to the neighborhood itself. The systematic campaign that had once threatened to destroy Murphy's gym had instead revealed the community's strength when faced with external pressure. Residents who'd never spoken to each other had formed lasting friendships while defending something they discovered they valued more than individual convenience. Rachel Kowalski had found purpose in coordinating the veterans program, channeling her experience with military loss into helping other families navigate similar challenges. Her work provided meaning that helped heal wounds that had festered since David's death in Afghanistan. The story's final image captured everything that made Murphy's gym worth fighting for. 3 generations worked together in the afternoon light, streaming through windows that no longer bore cracks from vandalism. Frank guided a young veteran through his first boxing lesson, helping him process combat trauma through disciplined physical activity. Mike worked with a group of teenagers, teaching them that boxing was about self-control and confidence rather than aggression or intimidation. Bobby demonstrated proper defensive stance to an 8-year-old girl whose mother had enrolled her after hearing about the gym's approach to building character alongside athletic skills. The cycle of mentorship and protection continued, ensuring that the values worth fighting for would survive and thrive for generations to come. Murphy's boxing gym had become more than a training facility. It was proof that communities could preserve what mattered most when they found the courage to stand together against forces that valued profit over people. In the end, Iron Mike Tyson's greatest victory hadn't come in any championship ring, but in a neighborhood gym where legends learned that true strength was measured not by what you could destroy, but by what you chose to protect. If you like the story, please watch another story on our channel and subscribe to the channel.